The night was cold, the kind that seeped into bones and left a lingering chill. Somewhere on the outskirts of town, an anonymous caller whispered into a phone line, their voice trembling but urgent. "There's been something at the old warehouse by the river. You need to come quick." The dispatcher scribbled down details hastily before dispatching officers to the scene. When they arrived, the sight was one etched in memory for years to come. Victor Kane lay sprawled across the cracked concrete floor, his face pale beneath streaks of blood. His suit jacket was torn, its once pristine fabric now soaked through with crimson. Papers fluttered around him like fallen leaves, scattered amid broken furniture. A chair overturned here, a shattered table leg there. It looked less like a crime scene and more like the remnants of a war zone. One officer knelt beside Victor, checking for a pulse. "He's alive," he called out, relief threading through his voice. Paramedics rushed in moments later, their boots echoing against the hollow silence of the warehouse. As paramedics worked to stabilize Victor, his lips parted faintly, releasing words barely audible over the commotion. "The deal," he rasped, his voice hoarse and strained. "He set me up." "What deal?" one of the officers asked, leaning closer. But Victor's eyes fluttered shut again, his head lolling to the side as consciousness slipped away. "He's fading," a medic shouted, pressing gauze to the wound on his temple. The officer exchanged glances with his partner. There were no immediate answers, only fragments of a story waiting to be pieced together. Who had set him up? And what deal could warrant such violence? Victor's mind flickered between lucidity and darkness, memories surfacing unbidden. He saw himself seated at a sleek mahogany desk late one night, sweat beading on his forehead as Marcus Holt loomed across from him. Marcus's smile was sharp, almost predatory, as he slid documents toward Victor. "You sign this, and we're golden," Marcus had said, his tone smooth, but edged with impatience. Victor hesitated, pen hovering above the paper. "This isn't legal." Marcus chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Legal? Come on, Vic. When has playing by the rules ever gotten us ahead?" Victor remembered the weight of the pen in his hand, the way it felt foreign, yet inevitable. He signed, sealing not just a business agreement, but a pact with forces far beyond his control. Now, lying broken on the warehouse floor, those decisions haunted him. Each signature, each compromise had unraveled threads until the entire tapestry collapsed. Amidst the chaos, investigators combed the area, searching for clues. One detective paused near a puddle of blood, where torn contracts lay crumpled and smeared red. She crouched, picking up a fragment carefully. "Looks like financial records," she muttered, scanning the page. Numbers jumped out at her, figures too large to ignore. Her partner joined her, holding another piece of paper. "These are property deeds, high-value properties. Someone stood to gain big if this went through." The documents told a story of greed and ambition gone awry. They hinted at betrayal, at someone willing to destroy lives for profit, but whose hands bore the most guilt. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the oppressive quiet of the warehouse. Backup units arrived, their headlights slicing through the gloom outside. Officers fanned out, securing the perimeter while detectives continued their grim work inside. The contrast between the cacophony outside and the eerie stillness within was jarring. Every footstep echoed. Every rustle of paper seemed amplified. Detective Harris turned to her team. "We need to find whoever did this, and fast. This isn't just a beating. This is personal." Her words hung heavy in the air, a promise to uncover the truth no matter how ugly it might be. As the investigation unfolded, questions swirled like storm clouds. Who was Marcus Holt, and what role had he played in Victor's downfall? What deal had driven two men to such extremes? Victor's cryptic whispers offered little clarity, leaving investigators grasping at shadows. For now, the answers remained buried beneath layers of deceit and desperation. But one thing was certain. The events leading to this moment weren't born overnight. They were the culmination of choices made in fear, greed, and misplaced trust. And somewhere, someone knew the full story. The chapter closed with the hum of activity filling the warehouse, a stark reminder that justice often began in the aftermath of tragedy. Victor Kane was the epitome of suburban success, a self-made man who had clawed his way to respectability through sheer grit and determination. His construction company employed dozens, and his name carried weight in community meetings. Neighbors admired him for his work ethic, often remarking how he never stopped hustling. But behind closed doors, Victor wrestled with a gnawing dissatisfaction that no amount of accolades could quell. Financial pressures loomed large despite outward appearances. The market was shifting, competition tightening, and Victor felt the walls closing in. Society demanded perfection from men like him, breadwinners, leaders, but the pressure wore thin on even the strongest resolve. He masked his struggles with the late nights at the office, telling himself it was all for his family. Yet deep down, he feared failure more than anything else. One evening, as he sat alone in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey, Victor stared blankly at photos of happier times, family vacations, birthday celebrations. Those smiles seemed distant now, relics of a life slipping away. Claire noticed the change long before anyone else did. Once warm and attentive, Victor had become distant, consumed by work and preoccupied with problems she couldn't understand. She tried to bridge the gap between them, but every attempt ended in frustration. "Victor," she said one night, standing in the doorway of his study, "you've been working non-stop. Can we talk?" He glanced up briefly, then returned to his laptop. "Not now, Claire. I'm busy." Her jaw tightened. "You're always busy. When was the last time you spent an evening with your own family?" "I'm doing this for us," he snapped, slamming the lid shut. "If you don't see that, maybe you're not paying attention." The words stung, cutting deeper than any argument they'd had before. Claire retreated to bed, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him, to trust that his sacrifices were noble. But doubt crept in, whispering truths she wasn't ready to face. Ethan, their teenage son, idolized his father, or at least he used to. Lately, though, cracks were showing in that admiration. He overheard arguments late at night, snippets of raised voices filtering through the walls. "Why does Dad have to work so much?" Ethan asked his mother during breakfast one morning. Claire hesitated, stirring sugar into her coffee. "He's trying to take care of us, sweetheart." "But he's never here," Ethan countered, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate. "And when he is, he's different." She didn't know what to say. How could she explain something she barely understood herself? Instead, she reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "It'll get better," she promised, though even she wasn't sure she believed it. Marcus Holt entered Victor's world like a storm, charismatic, ambitious, and unapologetically bold. Where Victor valued caution, Marcus thrived on risk, seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles. Their partnership began innocuously enough, with Marcus bringing fresh ideas to revitalize Victor's stagnating business. "You're playing too safe, Vic," Marcus remarked during one of their early meetings. "The world rewards those who aren't afraid to gamble." Victor chuckled nervously. "Gambling can cost you everything. And playing it safe gets you nowhere." Marcus shot back, leaning forward. "Look, I'm not asking you to jump blindfolded. Just trust me. We can make moves that'll put us leagues ahead of the competition." At first, their collaboration yielded results. Contracts rolled in, profits soared, and Victor allowed himself to relax slightly. But beneath the surface, subtle differences in values began to emerge. While Victor prioritized stability, Marcus pushed boundaries, testing limits Victor wasn't sure he wanted to cross. It started with a proposal, a lucrative real estate deal involving insider trading and bribes to local officials. Marcus laid out the plan with practiced ease, painting a picture of untold wealth and security. "This is our golden ticket," Marcus insisted, sliding documents across the table. "Sign here, and we're set for life." Victor hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. "This isn't legal," Marcus smirked. "Legal doesn't matter if nobody finds out. Besides, do you really want to keep scraping by while everyone else gets rich?" The question struck a nerve. Images of Claire's disappointed eyes, Ethan's quiet resentment, flashed through Victor's mind. Failure wasn't an option. Not anymore. With trembling hands, he signed the document, sealing a pact with forces far beyond his control. Claire's unease grew steadily. Late-night phone calls, missing funds from their joint account, and Victor's increasingly erratic behavior painted a troubling picture. One evening, unable to contain her suspicions any longer, she confronted him. "What's going on, Victor?" she demanded, holding up a bank statement. "Where is all this money going?" Victor snatched the paper from her hands. "I don't need you questioning my decisions. You wouldn't understand." "Try me," she shot back, voice rising. "Or are you hiding something?" His temper flared. "Stop being paranoid, Claire. If you'd just focus on supporting me instead of doubting me, maybe things would be easier." The accusation hit its mark, leaving Claire stunned. For the first time, she wondered if there was truth to her fears. Dinner was tense that night, the air thick with unspoken grievances. Midway through the meal, Victor's phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at the screen, then excused himself. Claire watched as he stepped outside, speaking in hushed tones. When he returned, his face was pale, jaw clenched tight. "Who was that?" she asked, attempting casual curiosity. "No one important," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. But Claire saw the tremor in his hands, the flicker of panic in his eyes. Something was wrong, and whatever it was, it terrified him. Subtle signs began to pile up. Arguments between Victor and Marcus grew heated, disagreements over strategy hinting at deeper rifts. "You're moving too fast," Victor argued during one such exchange. "We need to slow down, think this through." "Slow down and lose momentum?" "Not happening," Marcus retorted. "If you're scared, maybe you shouldn't be in this game." Victor bristled but said nothing, swallowing his pride. Still, doubts lingered. Why was Marcus so evasive about certain details? And why did he always seem one step ahead? By now the strain on the family was undeniable. Claire withdrew emotionally, retreating into solitude. Ethan acted out at school, channeling his confusion into rebellion. Even Victor, desperate to maintain appearances, found the facade slipping. One night, after another fruitless attempt to connect with Claire, Victor poured himself a drink and stared at his reflection in the window. Lines etched his face, shadows darkening his eyes. How did it come to this? He whispered to no one. The question hung unanswered, a harbinger of storms yet to break. Victor's phone buzzed incessantly on his desk one evening as he pored over financial reports. Each message was more cryptic than the last, but their meaning became painfully clear after the third. Marcus is bleeding you dry. The next morning, an email arrived with attachments, bank statements, and offshore account records showing transfers in Marcos's name. Victor stared at the screen, his chest tightening. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. How could I have been so blind? Victor muttered under his breath, running a hand through his thinning hair. His mind raced, replaying every conversation, every deal they'd made together. Was Marcus always this cunning? Or had desperation clouded Victor's judgment? Paranoia crept in like a shadow, whispering doubts about everything he thought he knew. He felt betrayed, not just by Marcus, but by himself for trusting him in the first place. The tension came to a head during a meeting at their shared office. Victor slammed the documents onto the table, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You've been stealing from us, Marcus. From me." Marcus leaned back in his chair, unfazed. "What are you talking about, Vic? These look like fake documents to me." "They're real," Victor snapped. "I checked them myself. You've been funneling money into offshore accounts while I've been busting my ass to keep this company afloat." Marcus smirked, leaning forward. "Oh, come on. If anyone's incompetent here, it's you. Maybe if you weren't so distracted by your crumbling marriage, you'd notice how poorly you've managed things." Victor's fists clenched beneath the table. "Don't try to turn this around on me. This ends now." But Marcus only shrugged, his calm demeanor infuriating. "Suit yourself. But remember, we're in this together. Whatever happens to me will happen to you too." As days passed, Victor found himself unable to focus. Sleep eluded him, replaced by restless nights spent staring at the ceiling or scrolling through incriminating evidence. Alcohol became his crutch, a bottle of whiskey always within reach. Claire noticed the change immediately. "You smell like a bar?" she said sharply one evening when he stumbled into the kitchen. "I'm fine," Victor slurred, avoiding her gaze. "No, you're not. Something's wrong, Victor. Talk to me." He turned on her, anger flaring. "You wouldn't understand. Just leave me alone." Her expression hardened. "Fine, but don't expect me to pick up the pieces when you finally hit rock bottom." Victor retreated to his study, guilt gnawing at him. Every drink numbed the pain temporarily, but the weight of his choices grew heavier with each passing day. One afternoon, while searching for Victor's tax records, Claire stumbled upon a hidden folder in his filing cabinet. Inside were contracts, bank statements, and emails detailing illegal transactions. Her hands trembled as she read through them, piecing together the truth. She confronted him that night, holding up the documents. "What is this, Victor? What have you done?" His face went pale. "Where did you find those?" "That doesn't matter. Tell me what's going on." Victor sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. It started as a way to save the business, but now it's spiraling out of control. Claire shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You've ruined us. Do you realize that? We could lose everything, including our freedom." "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he pleaded. "Please, Claire, don't tell anyone." "Not yet." Her silence spoke volumes. Loyalty warred with morality inside her, leaving her torn between protecting her family and doing what was right. At school, Ethan's behavior worsened. Once a quiet, obedient student, He now lashed out at teachers and peers alike. During a particularly heated argument with his math teacher, he shouted, "Why does everyone expect me to be perfect? None of you know what it's like." Word reached Claire, who called him into the living room that evening. "Ethan, what's going on with you?" "Nothing," he muttered, refusing to meet her eyes. "This isn't nothing. You're acting out, and I want to help." "You can't fix this," he shot back. "Just like you can't fix Dad." The words cut deep, forcing Claire to confront the reality of their fractured family. Marcus cornered Victor in a parking lot after another tense meeting. "Listen carefully, Vic. If this blows up, you take the fall. Got it?" Victor bristled. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm offering you a lifeline," Marcus replied smoothly. "Play along, and there'll be enough money to start fresh once the dust settles. Fight me, and we both go down." Victor hesitated, pride warring with fear. "And what makes you think I won't expose you?" Marcus grinned. "Because you're too scared to admit failure? Admitting you were wrong would destroy everything you've built, including your precious reputation." Defeated, Victor nodded. For now, he had no choice but to play along. Claire confided in her sister Rachel over coffee one afternoon, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to do. He's involved in something dangerous, and I'm afraid of what might happen if I stay." Rachel placed a comforting hand on hers. "Then don't stay. Think about Ethan. Do you really want him growing up in this mess? But where would we go? How would we survive?" "You'll figure it out," Rachel insisted. "Sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do." Claire nodded slowly, though doubt lingered. Leaving meant abandoning the life she'd built, but staying meant risking even more. Investigative journalist Lila Torres approached Claire outside her workplace one day. "Mrs. Kane, I need your help. There are rumors circulating about corruption involving your husband's company." Claire froze, heart pounding. "I don't know anything about that." Lila pressed on. "Look, I know this must be difficult, but exposing the truth could protect others from getting hurt. Please, consider helping me." Claire hesitated, torn between loyalty to her family and the moral obligation to speak up. "I'll think about it," she said finally, slipping away before Lila could respond. Victor's paranoia reached new heights. One night, he accused Claire of conspiring against him. "You've been talking to that reporter, haven't you?" "I haven't said a word," she protested. "Liar!" he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. Ethan stormed into the room. "Stop yelling at her." "This isn't your business, kid," Victor roared, turning on him. Ethan stood his ground, glaring defiantly. "Maybe if you weren't such a screw-up, none of this would be happening." The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken resentment. Days blurred into weeks as tensions simmered just below the surface. Claire wrestled with her decision, knowing any move she made would ripple outward. Victor, meanwhile, planned a final confrontation with Marcus, convinced it was the only way to reclaim control. Late one night, Claire overheard Victor murmuring into his phone, "Meet me tomorrow. We're settling this once and for all." Fear gripped her. Whatever Victor intended, it couldn't end well. She glanced at Ethan asleep in his room, then back at Victor pacing the hallway. As dawn broke, the household remained eerily quiet, each member lost in their thoughts. Somewhere beyond the horizon, storm clouds gathered, promising chaos and perhaps redemption. Victor stood in the dimly lit warehouse, his breath visible in the cold air. He clenched and unclenched his fists, trying to steady himself. This was it, the moment he'd been planning for days. He had called Marcus under the guise of resolving their differences, but inside, a storm brewed. "I'll make him pay," Victor muttered under his breath, pacing the empty space. His mind raced with images of Marcus's smug grin, the stolen money, the lies. Hatred burned through him like wildfire, fueling his resolve. He checked his watch again. Marcus was late, but not unexpectedly so. The man thrived on control, even in situations like this. Victor knew better than to trust him fully. But desperation left him no other choice. As footsteps echoed outside, Victor steeled himself. "Let's see how far you're willing to go, Marcus," he whispered, his voice low and trembling with barely contained rage. The door creaked open, and Marcus stepped in, flanked by two burly men whose presence immediately set off alarm bells in Victor's mind. "What's this?" Victor demanded, taking a step back. Marcus smirked, spreading his arms wide. "Insurance. You didn't think I'd come alone, did you?" Victor's stomach churned. He had suspected Marcus might try something sneaky, but seeing those thugs confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an ambush. "You coward," Victor spat, his voice shaking with anger. "You couldn't face me yourself?" "Oh, don't flatter yourself, Vic," Marcus replied coolly. "This isn't about you. It's about cleaning up loose ends." The weight of those words hit Victor like a punch to the gut. His pulse quickened as realization dawned. Marcus intended to silence him permanently. Before Victor could react, one of the thugs lunged forward, swinging a heavy pipe toward his head. Instinct kicked in. Victor ducked just in time, the weapon whistling past his ear. "Enough games!" Victor shouted, charging at Marcus with everything he had. The fight that followed was brutal and chaotic. Fists flew, grunts filled the air, and furniture splintered under the force of their struggle. For a brief moment, Victor managed to pin Marcus against a wall, his forearm pressing hard against the man's throat. "You betrayed me," Victor growled, his face inches from Marcus's. "Admit it." Marcus gasped for air, his usual confidence faltering. "Fine. Yes, I took the money, but you were too weak to stop me." Victor's grip tightened, satisfaction flickering across his face. Finally, the truth laid bare. With Marcus subdued, Victor turned to the thugs, his chest heaving. "Back off, or your boss gets it." For a split second, they hesitated, unsure whether to risk their employer's life. Victor seized the opportunity, dragging Marcus further into the center of the room. "This ends now," Victor snarled, his voice dripping with venom. But triumph was fleeting. Marcus's eyes darted toward his henchman, a silent signal passing between them. Without warning, the larger thug tackled Victor from behind, sending him crashing to the ground. Pain exploded in his ribs as boots connected with his body repeatedly. Each blow felt like a hammer striking steel, driving the air from his lungs. "Stop!" Victor choked out, shielding his face with his arms. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow, blurring his vision. Marcus staggered to his feet, wiping blood from his lip. "Finish him," he ordered coldly. Victor's world spun as the beating continued. His strength waned, each strike chipping away at his will to fight. Desperation clawed at him, but there was nothing left to give. Just as Victor slipped into unconsciousness, the sharp crack of gunfire shattered the chaos. One of the thugs collapsed, clutching his leg, screaming in pain. Claire stood in the doorway, her hands trembling around the grip of a handgun. Her eyes were wide with terror, yet resolute. "Get away from him!" she screamed, aiming the weapon at Marcus. Marcus froze, his expression shifting from shock to fury. "You stupid bitch!" Claire fired another shot, narrowly missing him. Panic erupted among the remaining thugs who scrambled for cover. Seizing the distraction, Marcus bolted for the exit, abandoning his men without a second glance. "Don't let him get away!" Claire shouted, rushing to Victor's side. But Victor was barely conscious, his body broken and bleeding. Claire dropped to her knees beside him, cradling his head in her lap. "Why? Why did you come?" Victor rasped, his voice weak. "To save you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Even if I hate what you've done, I couldn't let you die." Outside, the sound of tires screeching signaled Marcos's escape. The warehouse fell silent except for Victor's labored breathing and Claire's quiet sobs. As sirens wailed in the distance, Claire held onto Victor tightly, her actions raising questions she wasn't ready to answer. Loyalty, sacrifice, morality, all blurred together in the aftermath of violence. The morning after the warehouse confrontation, police cars lined the street outside Victor and Claire's home. Officers led them out in handcuffs, their faces pale and drawn. Reporters swarmed like vultures, cameras flashing as microphones were thrust toward them. "Victor Kane, what role did you play in the corruption scandal?" one shouted. Claire kept her head down, avoiding the barrage of questions. Inside the squad car, she glanced at Victor, who stared blankly ahead. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. In court, the media circus reached a fever pitch. Headlines screamed about betrayal, greed, and violence. Victor faced charges for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy, while Claire stood accused of assault for shooting Marcus's thug. Their private lives became public spectacle, every secret laid bare, every flaw magnified. "You think this is justice?" Victor muttered bitterly during a recess. "It feels more like revenge." Claire didn't respond. She couldn't shake the image of the man she'd shot, his scream echoing in her dreams. Ethan sat slumped on Aunt Rachel's couch, staring at the TV without seeing it. School had become unbearable. His grades plummeted, and he avoided friends who once filled his days with laughter. "Ethan," Rachel said gently, sitting beside him, "you can talk to me. Whatever you're feeling, it's okay." He shrugged her off. "What's the point? Nothing's ever going to be normal again." Memories haunted him. The sound of fists hitting flesh, his mother's trembling hands holding the gun, his father's broken body lying on the warehouse floor. Each thought gnawed at him, leaving him hollow. One night, Rachel found him scribbling furiously in a notebook. "What are you writing?" she asked. "Nothing," he snapped, slamming it shut. But later, when he thought no one was looking, he wrote a single sentence. "I wish I could fix everything." Behind bars, Claire wrestled with guilt that clawed at her conscience. Nights were the hardest, when silence pressed against her like a suffocating weight. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she whispered to herself, tears streaming down her face. "I just wanted to save him." Her lawyer visited often, urging her to plead self-defense. "You saved Victor's life," he reminded her. "That matters." But Claire wasn't so sure. Had she done the right thing, or made things worse? The line between protector and perpetrator blurred until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. She began writing letters to Ethan, pouring her heart onto paper. "I'm sorry," she wrote, "for all of it. Please don't make the same mistakes we did." The community remained divided over Claire's actions. Some saw her as a hero, a mother willing to risk everything to protect her family. Others condemned her, accusing her of enabling Victor's crimes by staying silent for so long. She should have turned him in sooner, a neighbor told a reporter. None of this would have happened if she'd spoken up. Others defended her. She was trapped, a friend argued. What choice did she have? Debate raged online and offline, reflecting broader societal tensions about loyalty, morality, and redemption. For Claire, the judgment stung deeply, adding another layer of pain to an already unbearable situation. Months later, Marcus was finally apprehended thanks to Lila Torres's relentless investigation. Cornered in a seedy motel room, he surrendered without resistance, his usual bravado replaced by resignation. At his trial, evidence piled high, offshore accounts, forged documents, witness testimonies. He showed no remorse, smirking through cross-examinations. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, there was a collective sigh of relief. Yet for those closest to the tragedy, closure felt elusive. He's paying for what he did, Claire said during a phone call with Rachel. But it doesn't bring back what we lost. As weeks turned into months, Claire continued writing letters to Ethan. Each one carried fragments of wisdom born from regret. Honesty isn't always easy, she wrote in one letter, but lies destroy everything they touch. Trust your instincts, even when it's hard. Victor, too, reflected on his choices from behind bars. During visits with Ethan, he struggled to find the words to apologize. I messed up, son, he admitted finally. I let greed blind me. Don't follow my path. Ethan nodded silently, unsure how to process the apology. Forgiveness felt distant, buried beneath layers of anger and disappointment. Slowly, tentatively, healing began. Ethan started opening up to Rachel, sharing stories about happier times before the chaos. He joined a support group for kids affected by parental incarceration, finding solace in shared experiences. Claire found purpose in her letters, eventually compiling them into a journal she hoped to give Ethan someday. Writing helped her process her guilt, offering glimpses of hope amidst despair. Victor, meanwhile, faced the reality of his choices. Prison stripped him of illusions, forcing him to confront the damage he had caused. Though freedom seemed far away, he vowed to change, for himself, for Ethan, for anyone who might still believe in him. The scars remained, raw and tender. But amid the ruins of their lives, each character took small steps forward, clinging to the fragile promise that time might soften the pain. In the dim light of her prison cell, Claire sat hunched over a worn notebook, pen trembling in her hand. The weight of everything unsaid pressed against her chest as she began writing. Dear Ethan, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me or your father for what we've done, but I need you to understand something. Our choices didn't just destroy us. They shattered everyone around us too. Her voice cracked as she whispered aloud, I have to make this right. Greed blinds people, Ethan. It made your father and me believe lies could protect us. Betrayal became second nature because fear ruled our lives. And now look where it's left us, all broken pieces trying to find meaning in the mess. She paused, tears smudging the ink. Please, my sweet boy, promise me one thing. Live with honesty. Be brave enough to face hard truths instead of running from them. Integrity might not seem like much when you're young, but trust me, it will save you more than anything else. Claire leaned back, staring at the ceiling as memories flooded her mind. She saw Victor signing those damning contracts, his hands shaking, but determined. She remembered her own silence, the years she'd spent ignoring red flags, hoping things would fix themselves. We thought we were protecting you, she murmured. addressing an invisible Ethan. But all we did was hurt you worse. Her letter continued, raw and unfiltered. Every choice has a price, Ethan. Ours cost us our family, our dignity, even our freedom. Fear drove us to take shortcuts, pride kept us from admitting mistakes, and desperation blinded us to the harm we caused. Don't let that be your story. The words felt heavy on the page, each sentence a confession carved out of pain. As Claire sealed the envelope, the narrator reflected on the larger lessons buried within their tragedy. Victor and Claire's downfall wasn't unique. It was a cautionary tale as old as time. Power and wealth promised fulfillment, but delivered ruin. Their pursuit of success had consumed them, leaving behind only wreckage. And yet, their story wasn't without purpose. It served as a stark reminder. Every action ripples outward, touching lives far beyond its origin. The consequences of greed and betrayal weren't confined to individuals. They spread like wildfire, scorching everyone in their path. Months later, Ethan held the letter in his hands, reading it for the 100th time. Something shifted inside him, a flicker of resolve amid the ashes of anger. He walked outside, breathing in fresh air for the first time in weeks. Aunt Rachel watched from the doorway, smiling faintly as he picked up his phone to call a counselor she had recommended. Though scars remained, there was hope, fragile, uncertain, but present nonetheless. Claire's words lingered in Ethan's mind, urging him toward a better future. Perhaps redemption wasn't impossible after all.